Hi everybody, today I'll be reviewing my SOG Powerpint. I'm going to try and refer to them as SOG during this review and not SOG because I believe they want to be known as SOG now. It stands for Studies and Observation Group. Quite an interesting company with quite an interesting history. It's worth a look if you are interested. My SOG Powerpint is not... done it already. My SOG Powerpint is not completely standard. So before we get started, I'll just show you what I changed. Firstly, both the blades, both the serrated and fine edge blade, I have converted to be non-locking. That is so that I can carry it in the UK without a good reason. I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my legal advice, but I am of the understanding that that is compliant with the law now. So that's what I've done so that I can carry this tool. The other change that I've made is what was once a bottle opener is now a flathead screwdriver. The bottle opener used to have an end on it quite similar to this can opener, where there's a lip for you to get a nail underneath and pull it out if you want to take out only that tool, but I got rid of that and I filed it into a small flathead because that's something that I felt this tool was missing. Anyway, let's get on with it a bit. We're going to start off with size comparisons as usual. It's a bit of a weird one for me to compare the size of, but I shall do my best. Here is a Gerber dime, which you can see is quite a bit smaller. Here's the Leatherman Signal, which is obviously quite a bit bigger, and that's exactly where the other tools here lie as well. It's quite an unusual size. Here's a Leatherman Charge Titanium. You can see it's quite a bit bigger as well. Here's a Center Drive Plus, which is obviously quite a bit bigger too. And lastly, a Gerber Bear Grylls Ultimate Multi-Tool, which is also quite a bit bigger, particularly in terms of width. Just about all of these are wider than the Powerpint as well, with the exception, of course, of the little Gerber dime. So it's quite an interesting place, this multi-tool. As for what to compare it to, I'm slightly at a loss. Throughout this review, I will be attempting to compare it to kind of both of these tools and show you where I think it fits. But honestly, the most apt size comparison would probably be something like a Leatherman Juice. I don't have one of them, so I'm just going to have to make do, unfortunately. So, every tool on the SOG Powerpint is both outwardly accessible and locking. It's one of my very favourite things about this tool. So if we take out the scissors here, for example, they open from the outside. Unlike a lot of multi-tools, I don't need to open the tool to get a tool pulled out from the inside and then close the tool. It is outwardly accessible, which is, I think, a wonderful thing, and I wish all multi-tools were like that. They all lock, and they all lock really rather well, all things considered. The unlock, if you like, is back here, which you'll see lifts up this back piece on the back. Sorry, black piece on the back. Now this is the single lock for all of the tools. Okay, and that leads me on to another interesting point. I've heard other reviewers complain that with this tool they get aggravated because when a tool's open, they've got to open the pliers to push the lock release to close the tool. That's not really true. So if you've got a tool open, what would be a good example here? Okay, I'll do this side. So we'll get the awl out, okay? So if you've got the awl open and you want to close the awl, because it is locked by a single lock bar across the top, and because lifting that lock bar is what unlocks it, opening any other tool partially will lift the lock bar and allow me to close the tool. Okay, so it's very easy actually to close any of these tools without having to open the pliers once you know that. So I think that's an important thing, and it's something that I really quite like. Yes, yeah, I think it's really good. The lock is really pretty solid. It's excellent. It's also worth noting that part of the reason this tool works so well for me as a UK legal carry tool is also because of that lock design. So the back piece here that has to lift up gets held down when you grip the multi-tool, meaning this non-locking serrated blade, for example, you can see very clearly doesn't lock. When I hold up here, I'm pushing the lock down into the tool. So I'm making it far harder for the tool to shut by pushing down here. Works even more so with the fine edge blade because I did a slightly better job of converting that to non-locking. If you're interested in how I did any of the conversions that I have done on this tool, let me know in the comments and I could maybe do a video on that if enough people are interested. So, we're going to start working our way through the tool list. I'm quite pleasantly surprised by what SOG claims about the number of tools in the Powerpint. There isn't any drastic things like Gerber claiming that the lanyard hole is a tool and that the tool lock is a tool. There's not really any of that going on. They didn't count the lanyard hole, they didn't count tool locks. The tools list is quite fair. First of all, the blade, the fine edge blade. It's a Warncliffe blade, which I think is a fantastic shape for general EDC work, brilliant for opening packages and that kind of thing. It is also remarkably thin. It's really thin and surprisingly thin behind the edge as well, which is really great to see, and I really like that in my multi-tools. My multi-tool blades don't tend to get a lot of use because generally I'm carrying an actual knife, which I prefer, which I kind of change out depending on the legal situation or what I want to carry, that kind of thing. But because I tend to be carrying a knife, I don't tend to use the tool, the blade on my multi-tools. However, because this one is so precise and so thin, if I hold up the tip of this hinderer next to it, you'll see very thin little precise tip on the Powerpint blade, and because of that it's actually really quite good for precision work, which gives me a reason to choose this blade sometimes. And because it's one hand accessible, it's not the easiest to open with one hand certainly, but it is, as you can see, one hand accessible. Yeah, it works for me. I can take it out and cut with one hand and close it with one hand, and it's thin and useful. It's doing something different than the knife that I tend to be carrying. So there is actually, it has a purpose is what I'm trying to say here. And that's really good because, for example, the blade on my Gerber center drive, it doesn't really get used. It gets used occasionally when I feel the need to for whatever reason, or if I'm using it because I'm going to be reviewing the tool, where the blade on this guy does actually get used, which is fantastic. So the serrated blade next. Both of these are the easiest two tools to open with one hand. Certainly if you're right-handed anyway. If you're left-handed, the pocket clip's in the way and the file. So I don't know if I can get it on one hand. Yes, I can. Anyway, we'll get to the file later. So the serrated blade, typically I've not really used the serrated blade very much, but it does lock nicely, certainly. Or certainly did lock nicely before I converted it to UK legal carry. It seems to be an effective serrated blade. I haven't used it for much, but what I have used it for, it's done quite well. That's all I can really say about the serrated blade. The can opener is next on my list. Where is the can opener? There's the can opener. Now the can opener in this tool is not good. Not even remotely good. It's a real shame. So it tends to tear through the can, it makes a mess, it doesn't open cans well. I don't know how many people really need a can opener from their multi-tool, but if a can opener is a requirement, the Leatherman one works far, far better than the one in this SOG Powerpint. It would be better than not having a can opener, but not by terribly much. The inch ruler is actually really quite good. So we've got inch and millimeter rulers listed as separate tools, which is kind of fair, I guess. I would have been inclined to say ruler and count both, but you see we've got centimeters down one side, inches down the other. But it's quite good. Because of the mechanism of the pliers, which we'll talk more about later, when it's open straight, it is always the same length. It's not the case that you could have like that straight and that straight. So there's two different lengths there, you know. It's not the case with the Powerpint. So it does work quite well as a ruler. The back of the plier head sticking out means you can't get it down flat on a surface, really. It sits on these points here. But I think it's a relatively effective ruler for the size of tool, and it's quite a large ruler for the size of tool as well. And like with another tool we'll talk about later, it's not in the way. It's just marking cut into the sides of the steel of this tool, so there isn't really a disadvantage to having it. So I'm glad that they did. Now, needle nose pliers. The pliers in this tool are very good. I am a big fan of the pliers in this tool. If we compare it again, size-wise, to the other two tools that we've talked about, we know it's right in the middle of the dime and the charge in size when closed, but if we look at the size of the plier head, you can see that it is far closer to the size of the plier head on the charge than it is to the size of the plier head on the dime, and it's the same when we look at the kind of thickness of them as well. Much closer to the charge than to the dime. If we open them up as well, we'll see that the charge opens up far larger than the dime, and that the Powerpint opens up far larger than the charge, which surprised me certainly. But there we go. I mean, that's that's the result. It's part of SOG's compound leverage system, which leads to that larger opening. But it's a very good system. Essentially, it's the gears that you're seeing at the end here, and what it does is it uses the gears to amplify the force that you put onto the handles. And you can feel it. You can feel it working. If you just grip your own finger with a tool like this, you can feel that the force you're putting on the plier head is being amplified. So I don't know how effective that is when you're working on things generally, but I do think that with it being a smaller multi-tool and not giving you as much handle to grip as something like a charge, I think it's a very, very useful feature. Another benefit of this system is that there is no slip joint mechanism in the opening. So these pliers are very smooth and easy to operate. Let me show you just a side-by-side comparison there. So there is no click, there is no slip joint point at anywhere along this opening. So I can flick the pliers around, flick them back, I can roll them out in a number of different ways. I quite like rolling them like that, where I push with my whatever finger this is called, and then I put my thumb into the plier head and roll it round. That works quite well for me. What also works quite well is putting my finger on the back of the plier head and pushing it closed like that. It's a very easy, very smooth system, which is something that you don't get with normal plier heads. If we look at a Leatherman for comparison, slip joint there, and then they close round. Open up, click, and close. And it's generally a two-handed process. Something like the Leatherman Signal can definitely be done one-handed because it's got a lock to hold the tool shut instead of relying on the slip joint mechanism. So I can definitely get the Signal quite easily with one hand, but it is still far more of a faff than something like the Powerpint. You can also use the pliers to push things open because they are geared and engaged, which you can't do with Leatherman pliers because you will just start to close the handles. So that's another benefit to the geared plier system. And also you can fold them right round and grab like this. Say you've got a nut, say my finger is a nut, you can grab like that over the nut. Because the pliers are always engaged, the handles don't close around the plier head until the tool is finally, absolutely closed. So at any decent angle, you can still grip, and it's still gripping with the plier head, and hold that way and use it to turn. So there's quite a lot of benefits to this mechanism. I do generally like sprung pliers, which they are not, but honestly, for the advantages from the geared system, I would choose SOG's compound leverage over a set of sliding sprung pliers like in the center drive, which shocks me a bit, but that's how it is. So there is a few problems with the pliers. The biggest one really is that the pliers do not meet quite perfectly at the tip. I wonder if I'll be able to show you that by putting some light behind it. Yeah, that works quite well. So you can see that the plier heads actually meet about 5 mil in from the tip, which is unfortunate. It makes it very difficult to grab very precise things. If we look at something like Leatherman's pliers, they tend to meet right at the tip because they have a small flat section out towards the tip. They didn't seem to have very much of it on the charge. I think there's more of it on the, there's a little flat bit towards the end there, where the plier heads actually meet, and then you can see an air gap through here to ensure that they meet right at the tip, which is very handy. I would quite like it if SOG was to start doing that on the Powerpint, and that would definitely be an improvement in my mind. There is also some rattle in this plier head mechanism. There's a bit of flex, that kind of thing. That is generally the case when you go for something that isn't quite a traditional setup. It's the same with the center drive and most other unusual plier mechanisms on multi-tools, and it doesn't bother me, but it may put you off. The pliers are surprisingly ergonomic as well, which is very pleasant and did catch me a bit off guard. The metal frame of the tool is folded round here, which gives you nice curved edges here and here, and then with the smooth back end of the tool generated by the curve of the back of all of these tools, it's actually very ergonomic, and the lock works quite well in there as well. These are surprisingly ergonomic pliers, especially if we compare them to something like the other SOG multi-tool in my collection, the SOG Sync 2, which has some, it's ergonomically not very good at all. We'll come back to the Sync 2 Traveller a bit later on. So, well, let's have a look at, talk about the bolt grippers. I mean, obviously everything that I said about the pliers applies to the bolt grippers since they are part of the pliers, but they do work very well. Same kind of thing with the soft wire cutters. They've performed okay for me so far. I quite like that they note on SOG's tool list on their website that they are soft wire cutters. They are not replaceable, like the Leatherman Charge or the Gerber center drive. They are non-replaceable wire cutters, and I haven't cut anything particularly solid with them because I do think that they would probably break far easier than Leatherman's, which are I think 154 cm. So I wouldn't expect the world out of these wire cutters, but they have gone quite easily through anything that I have cut. So I haven't cut anything particularly hard, but they've done a nice job of cutting what I have needed to cut. And I think the compound leverage helps out there again, because I feel probably slightly less resistance cutting soft wire with this than I do with the Charge, even though it's a smaller handled multi-tool, which I think is down to the compound leverage increasing my force. If not, I don't know what it is. The awl is next on the list. It's quite a good awl. I have bent the tip over slightly, and I don't know how I did it. You will see the bend, I think. Yeah, you can see the light hitting it slightly funny. Yeah, so there's a little bend in the tip of my awl, unfortunately, but it is still very pointy and still very effective. I've used it quite a bit for essentially doing a rough pilot hole for some screws, that kind of thing, and it's worked very well. I'm quite a fan of the awl on this tool. Next up we have the jewellery driver, which is quite an easy tool to access, surprisingly, despite being right in the middle. I have no strong feelings about this small tool. So call it a jewellery driver. It's perfectly functional. It has helped me out occasionally, and I do really admire the way that it's cleverly shaped. See how it kind of right up at the top there, if that makes sense, because it fits over the top of the plier head. That's the plier head here, the top of the plier head, and this tool fits over the top and is still below the line. So I do love the way that they made it and incorporated it, and it works fine for what it is, but there's not too much more I can really say about that. Next up is the hook cutter or strap cutter. It works fine. I haven't again cut a drastic amount of things with the hook cutter because I tend to have a knife on me, or if I need to cut something I tend to go for the fine edge blade. What I have used this tool for quite a lot, and you may be able to tell, is prying open paint cans, which is why this still has some paint on it, but it's worked very well for that. It has a chamfer to it. You'll see the light hitting it nicely there, so it's very good for opening paint cans. If that's what you look for in your hook cutters, then this may be the tool for you. The file. This isn't my favourite file. I prefer, certainly, Leatherman's half diamond file is, I think, a really, really good file. Having a diamond coated file just gives you quite a lot of versatility. So I would probably opt for Leatherman's file over the one in the Powerpint. However, it's also far from the worst in a multi-tool. The cross-hatched side is quite aggressive and quite capable, and this straight line side is not really gaining you anything, I don't think, over the cross-hatched one. I tended to use this side when I needed the file in this tool, also because I can actually get up against the surface easier with this side because the tool is not in the way. It is a 3-sided file though, and along the bottom you'll see there is just a set of ridges essentially, which I think would work alright. I think you'd be able to get through some material with that if you needed to. I believe that some people use files with an edge file, if you like, for getting through stuff like some PVC pipe, that kind of thing, and I think this would probably manage that if you needed to. Next up, the magnetic bit holder. This is one of the highlights of this tool for me. So, built into the back of the plier head, I'll just get my bits out of my pocket, there is a magnetic bit driver. Where is the magnet? What side is the magnet on? There we go. So, holds the bit in there with a magnet, and you close the tool. So, the magnet isn't as strong as I'd like it to be, but the bit driver is on the center axis, which helps you drive without having to do that weird pass around thing that you have to do with some multi-tools. I talked about that in my center drive review, so I won't harp on that too much here. One of the problems, however, the biggest problem really, is that if you don't hold this tool together as you turn, the bit can slip. So if the tool starts to open up, the bit can start to slip. And that's because the bit holder is essentially in 2 halves, and if the 2 halves aren't together, it's no longer going to hold the bit. As long as you grip it tightly enough though, it is a very capable driver. And I do love how it's built into this design. It doesn't really add any weight or bulk or anything that wouldn't have to be there already. I mean, as you can see, when I take that out, there's nothing sticking out really beyond the gear system here. So there's no downside again to having this. And because it uses 1/4" bits, it gets a very good grip in the screw, which is excellent, because that's what's more important to me than even my grip on the tool, really. If you're less likely to strip a screw, that's a very good thing. That's more important to me than the comfort of a driver in my hand, because I can deal with an uncomfortable hand. A stripped screw is much more of a pain. This driver is not particularly uncomfortable, but it does cramp up your hand a bit because you've got to hold it together. And you've got to always turn your hand to get it held together. You can't really hold it like this. It's got to be across the way so that you're holding the tool together. But I would far rather have a driver like this that I had to hold together, but then used a standard 1/4" hex bit, than something like a Leatherman, really, where, yeah, you don't have to hold the tool together, but it's using Leatherman's own proprietary bits, which I don't like. And they don't fill out the screw head properly, which is my biggest issue. I mean, this is a PZ2, and this is a PZ2. But if you look at them at this angle, you'll see that one of these is going to get a lot more grip on the screw. And unfortunately, I've had some bad experiences with Leatherman bits in the past. I had a T6 that the end actually came off, trying to unscrew just a CRKT Symmetry, a small Chinese-made knife, and its screws were tougher than Leatherman's bits, and it wasn't taking much force, and yeah, I wasn't impressed. And because they're only Leatherman that makes those bits, you can't go and buy a better one, which is something that really bugs me. For my Torx bits, they're a little bit rusted now because this bit set stays in my pocket, but these are Wehab bits, and they are very, very good. And a lot of the bits that I take with me generally are Torx bits. I have a T6, T8, T10, because those are the 3 that I need for pocket knives most often. And when I'm carrying a knife that I'm reviewing, if I want to make some adjustments to it, it means I can kind of on the go, so to speak. And I wouldn't really be able to do that with Leathermans because I don't trust the quality of their T6 bits, and I can't get a better one. So the fact that this is a standard 1/4" hex bit driver is wonderful. One of my very favourite things about this tool. I don't know if I would carry this anywhere near as much as I do if it didn't have a standard 1/4" hex bit driver in the end, because I carry that in a pocket, clipped in a pocket, and I carry this sitting in the bottom of one of my pockets, plastic set from a Gerber center drive actually, that forms around my leg and I don't really notice it, and it gives me the ability to do a lot of different types of screw, and do a lot of different types of screw very well without really any fear of stripping out the screw. What tends to happen is that I run out of force I can put on something this size before I damage the screw, which is a better way round for it to be, in my opinion, than with the Leatherman, where I'm more inclined to strip a screw or damage the bits. Next up, the wire crimper. The wire crimper is built into the back of the plier head as well, and it is just in front of the hex bit set. It's a wonderful place for it, I think. Do I have anything that I could use to indicate that? Let's use this, I guess. So yes, that is where the wire crimper is, right there. So you would crimp wires with that piece there. Now again, I haven't really needed it very often. I think I've only crimped 1 or 2 wires with it, but it worked very well, and again I attribute that to the compound leverage system, increasing the force and just making it require less force to do the task, and therefore amplifying the ergonomics of the tool in a manner of speaking, because the harder you grip a tool, the less likely it is to be comfortable. So if you have to grip the tool less hard, the more comfortable the tool essentially is. Next up, we have a bevel gauge. Now, I think they're referring to this piece here, which most reviewers have called a protractor, and I think that's closer to the truth, certainly. In reality, I don't think it works very well as either. See, there's lines on the frame of the tool, and the idea is supposed to be that you can set them to an angle like 90 degrees and have the tool be at 90 degrees. However, it's very hard to see, and it's hard to tell if it's lined up properly, and I just don't think it's a useful tool at all. However, I also don't agree with the other YouTubers who've criticised the Powerpint because of this. Yes, it is an absolutely terrible bevel gauge, but it's not taking up any space. It's not costing you anything. There's no extra weight or complexity or anything because of it. They would have to have this black piece of metal here to hold the tool together regardless. So all they've done is engrave something in there. Now, it's not going to be useful to me. I doubt it's going to be useful to you, but I'm still glad it's there because there's no downside. So yes, it's a terrible bevel gauge, but it's still an attribute to this tool because it doesn't have a downside. The scissors in this tool are fine, really. They're kind of the level I would expect from multi-tool scissors. They cut paper very well. And card, this is card, I guess you would call it, really. But they cut that fine. They cut soft, easy to cut materials perfectly well. Anything above that they start to struggle with. Pretty standard for a multi-tool, but not exceptional. The bottle opener I can't review because I turned it into a flathead screwdriver, but the reason for that, for me, is one of the downsides of this tool, which is that there is no flathead built into this tool as standard except the very small one. Now, you can absolutely carry a flathead in a bit set for this tool, and you'll see that I do carry a larger flathead, larger even than the one that I filed in here. But I wanted an extra flathead in this tool in case I don't have my bit set with me, because a flathead screw is something that I do come up against fairly often. And the one that I filed on has worked really quite well, actually. I recommend that that you do that to this tool if you're ever going to be carrying it without a bit set. Final tool that we need to talk about is the #1 Phillips, which is notably thicker than the other tools, and it's a really capable #1 Phillips. And what I particularly love about this is that they haven't done the bizarre hybrid PH1, PH2 thing that tool companies quite often do. This tool on the Sync 2 Traveller, you can see it's quite a bit bigger than the one, but it's about the same thickness, and the angles are off for a 2, and it's a pretty useless screwdriver. This is not going to do great at turning a PH2, but it is going to be able to turn a PH1 in a useful manner. And then if you need a bigger one, you can carry it in a bit set. So what that essentially means is that because they've done this properly, it saved me putting a PH1 in my set. So it saved me a space in the bits. Whereas if they'd done a hybrid half-sized weird thing that's trying to do the jobs of both, I would have felt the need to carry a proper PH1 and a proper PH2. So I like this tool. It's still useful to me. That is all the tools individually. Before we go on though, I do want to just quickly mention just how tool dense this tool is, which I know is a weird term, but if I fan it out, I think you'll get what I mean. This is a very compact tool, as we've already talked about. But if I fan out all the tools that are in it, and bear in mind, unlike a lot of multi-tools, most of these are pretty capable tools. There is some bad ones like the can opener and that kind of thing, but generally the tools in this are pretty good. Now if I do the same and fan out something smaller than it, like the Gerber dime, quite quickly see that we're not even batting in the same ballpark in terms of number of tools, very clearly. If I was to do a bigger multi-tool, you'll need to bear with me a second. I don't have the hands to do all of this at once. Yeah, so if I open out the inside tools from the Leatherman Charge, which is quite a well-known multi-tool, so it should be a decent comparison for this. The fact that this is taking me longer says something about inwardly accessible tools instead of outwardly accessible tools. I'll need to shut the pliers on this one as well because it has that weird lock that doesn't let you... I don't know how I'm going to do that. There we go, there's the inward tools, and I'll just need to shut them because of the weird... Well, probably quite handy really. The Leatherman Charge has a little bar that it pushes through the hole to stop you opening the blades when the plier head's open, which is quite a good decision, but not very helpful for me right now. So there you go. There's the outwardly accessible tools. You're going to have to use your imagination and pretend that the inwardly accessible ones are open as well. But I think you get my point. There's a huge amount of tool packed into the Powerpint, and that's still not showing you the fact that you've got the hex bit driver in the back and the wire crimper and that kind of thing. It's a very, very capable tool for its size is really what I'm trying to get at here. So the Powerpint has a decent pocket clip. It is branded, which a lot of people don't like. You see it says SOG there, but it's so mild that I don't think it would really bother me very much. This Leatherman one says Leatherman more clearly than this SOG one says SOG. There is a bit of an issue in the pocket, which is that, there we go, that's a good demonstration. If I just hold the clipped side and give the tool a little shake, it starts to open out. So if this is clipped in your pocket and the back edge of your pocket is here, as you move around the tool will open up in your pocket. So unfortunately it kind of limits where you can carry this tool. I make sure that I'm carrying this tool clipped into my pocket and the back edge of my pocket is against this side, which holds it shut, but it is definitely an inconvenience. It means I actually can't carry this tool quite where I would want it to. Quite where I would have wanted to. So it's not really a drastic problem if you make sure you carry it in a pocket that makes sense, but it's not the best. It's not great when you're carrying this tool. Other than that, this tool carries very well because it is so compact and being clipped in your pocket, it stays vertical on your person instead of lying sideways in the bottom of your pocket. I prefer carrying this to carrying the Gerber dime in terms of purely carry experience. This gets in my way and interferes with me less than the dime does. And given the capability difference, I'm sure you could imagine which one I would pick. Build quality. The SOG is not the best made multi-tool I've ever encountered, but given its price, it's really pretty good. The pliers not meeting at the tip is my biggest quality control complaint. And again, it is slightly loose and rattly, but that's not really an issue that can be fixed in a tool like this without probably machining it incredibly well and charging a huge amount of money. I love that it is screwed together, and I believe it's all T8. I'm pretty sure it's T8, but we'll just have a check just now. Yes, T8. So even on a compact multi-tool, they didn't go for... Is that T6? Is there two different sizes of screws going on here? Or do I just have enough dirt in them that I can't get my T8 driver in? Right, yes, I think some of these screws are just filled up with dirt. It's T8. It's T8 certainly up here, which is fantastic. It really is. I'm so glad they used a decent sized Torx bit, and I'm so glad they used Torx because that's what allowed me to take this tool apart and modify the tools inside to be how I wanted them to be. And you can also adjust the tension in these two screws here, which will stiffen up the tool and mean it's not quite as easy to open and things. I like to be able to flick it around, so I keep mine fairly loose, but tightening it up would stop it falling open in the pocket as easily as it does, and that kind of thing. The cost of the Powerpint is £48 in the UK, which I think is really very good. If you look at this compared to a Leatherman Squirt PS4, which is around £42, I would put the Squirt as far closer competition to the Dime. I know it's being compared to the Dime quite a lot. I know some people, probably most people, prefer the Squirt, but some people do still prefer the Dime. And I would have to say that this is, in my opinion, a far more capable tool than either. And far easier to carry, and really not much more money. Unless you're planning on carrying it on your keys, in which case go for the Dime or the Squirt, probably the Squirt. If you're not planning on carrying it on your keys, you're planning on carrying it on your body in a pocket, I would strongly recommend the Powerpint, because I think the pocket clip makes a bigger difference to the carry than that size difference there. I would absolutely go with the little extra weight and the little extra money and go for the Powerpint. In conclusion, finally, good grief, it's a 36-minute long video. I'm sorry if you've made it this far. Multi-tools are so specific for each person and each use case that, you can probably already tell from this review what your opinion on this multi-tool is. There's some people who only look for a good pair of scissors. There's some people who only look for a good file, that kind of thing. So it's a very difficult thing for me to recommend a multi-tool to someone without knowing their needs particularly. However, if someone wanted kind of a general use type multi-tool, yeah, I would absolutely recommend the Powerpint if they wanted something in roughly this size. Because it's just really, really good. And it's so capable for its size. I mean, look at the size of this monster next to it. If we quickly fan out the tools again, this was the tool I should have used at the start for this comparison. Fan these round, yeah, there we go. Yeah, look at the difference there. These two are also about the same price. More capable, in my opinion, than this. Same money, roughly, way more compact. And it's basically because of that, and largely because of the capability of the pliers and its ability to drive normal hex bits, that the Powerpint has become my favourite multi-tool, and by a significant margin. The most annoying thing about the Powerpint, except the pliers not meeting quite right, is how they managed to get the sync so wrong when they did the Powerpint so right. All of the tools in this are better than just about any of the tools in the sync. I don't get it. How did you get this so wrong, Sock? Watch my review of the Sync 2 if you're interested. It has some very high points and some very low points. Pints. Powerpint? I guess I just made a Nick Shabazz style pun there without even meaning to. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. I think this is a great multi-tool. Everyone else who I've talked to who has one seems to very much like it as well. So I hope this review's been helpful for you, and I apologise for taking up so much of your time. Thank you very much. Bye.